So if you go to session 6, inside there's a folder called Skin Correction by the Numbers. And inside that is a file called Sunburn by Terry Richardson. If any of you know who Terry Richardson is, you won't be surprised by the nature of this picture. So, okay, so we need to get rid of the sunburn. What's more important about this, though, it's an idea about color matching. So this comes up when we were talking about actually doing color matching for backgrounds, doing that sort of thing. If you've got two images that you're trying to get stuff together, if you end up stealing skin from one person and put it into another person, that kind of stuff, it's a way to just match the color parts of it. A lot of people do this by eye. I don't do this by eye. I do this by the numbers. It's just much faster. I'm going to show you two versions, two ways of doing this. So did everybody get this image open? We're all good? Okay. So first things first that you should do in any one of these situations, I need to get a sample of the area that I want to fix. That's the area we're going to start with. So the area that I want to fix is the sunburn part. And what you're looking for is the most extreme area of the sunburn. But if you zoom in really close to this, so just zip in, you can see that there's a mottledness in her skin. And so when we go to actually lay a color point down, my concern is that I'm going to hit like one of these lighter, whiter areas as opposed to one of the darker, redder areas. That becomes a problem for me in trying to do this by the numbers, because you can hit the wrong point. So to get away from that, we are going to start by making a copy of our background layer. So hit Command J, and then we're going to blur that up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And I'm going to hit mine with a 2, and that's more than enough. You could hit a 2 or a 3. I'll go ahead and hit it for a 3, and yeah, that seems pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So this is a great trick. A lot of times, I do this all the time. I will find a color of sky that I really like in a magazine, and I'll simply tear that out of a magazine, and I will scan it on a flatbed scanner, and I'll bring it into Photoshop, and I can read the numbers. But the problem that you have with a magazine is that magazines are made up of halftone dots. And so if you go zoom in close enough to a magazine, you'll see that it's made up of strictly cyan, magenta, and yellow, and black. And so to get around that, you need to blur that. So it's the very same trick that we're doing here. I would scan that image, bring it into Photoshop, blur it, then read its color value, and that'll give me a true value for the sky. So if I want to recreate the sky, it's based on a legitimate color. Does that sort of make sense? Okay. So we are going to drop down 2 color points here. So again, I'm going to go over to my eyedropper tool in the tool palette, click on the flyout menu. We're not grabbing the eyedropper at the top, but the color sampler tool at the bottom. And the first sample that you want, now you can do this in either order, but it's simpler to do the area that is wrong first, and you'll see why in a second. You can do it the other way around, but I'm going to strongly suggest that you focus on the area that you need to fix is where your first color sampler point goes. And what you're also looking for is the worst of it. So I am looking for an area pretty much in the top, it looks like right here, that is the most sunburned. The reddest of the reddest. Not an area in here where it's a little bit lighter, a little bit less, but really the worst, most deepest red part. And I'm going to click and drop down a point. And you'll see I get a number 1 point that's sitting right over here that actually gives me the readout of that value. Then I'm going to zip back out, and I'm going to look for my next point. And the next point is, what color of skin do I want this to actually be? Now, I don't want it to be the same color as the area underneath this, that super white skin, the skin that's never seen any sun at all. I don't want it to be that color. I actually want it to be the color of her body. So in looking at this, I've got options. I could try to go up to the very top of her chest, but the problem is that if she's got this sunburn right here, in all likelihood, the very top of it has got some sunburn as well, so that's not an option for me. I could go out onto her arm. The thing about her arm, though, that I need to worry about is the same thing. In most cases, if she's got this kind of sunburn on her top, there's a good chance that her arm has got that same kind of sunburn, if not as strong, at least a farmer version of it. So for me, the safest spot to go is actually down on her stomach. So that's where I'm going to go. However, if you look at her stomach, you can see that there is a pretty serious highlight right in the very middle. That's a classic Terry Richardson flash on camera lighting. But as I start to move over to the sides, I start to pick up real color and real tone, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. However, I don't want to be too ambitious. I don't want to go all the way over and actually get to the shadow that's on the far right-hand side. That's going to be too dark for me. So instead, I'm going to just pick a spot that's somewhat down in here. I'm looking kind of under this, and I'm going to just hit another spot right there, and I get a second point. And if you take a look now, you can see up in our info palette that I've got my point number 1. These are the problems areas. And then I got my point number 2, which are the fixed areas. And it also tells me then what I need to change. So if I can make the point number 1 numbers equal the point number 2 numbers, I will have removed the red. Or better put, I will have actually made that red color the color of the skin down on her stomach that is not sunburned. So that's the goal. Next move is to simply add a curve. So just come down to the circle that's half black, half white at the bottom of your layers palette and come up, and we're going to add a curve to this. I am going to not change the blending mode of this because I not only want to change the color of this, I actually want to change the tone behind it. Because you can see the skin that's down here on her stomach part is a little bit lighter. Not only has it been sunburned, it's changed in color, but it's also been made darker. So I need to go after both of those options. So I'm not going to change my blending mode. In this case, I really do want color and luminosity both to be changed. Okay, the reason I told you to actually make the problem area the first part is that if you take a look at my screen here really quickly. So you can see the minute we put a curve on here, we get 2 sets of numbers now. The numbers that are on the left side of the forward slash line are the original numbers. The numbers that are after the forward slash line are the after numbers. Now in this case, they're exactly the same. And so for me, what I'm trying to do is figure out, the before numbers and the after numbers that I want to actually do in here. So if you take a look at the after numbers on my point number 1, this 244, I want it to be 229. So again, the after numbers and the before numbers, because of the order that we put them into, are next to each other. Does that make sense? Again, if I'd done the opposite order numbers, they would be the numbers that were on the outside edges of it all. But so I can see that I want this 229 to be a 244, I want this 190 to be a 171, and I want this 172 to be a 165. So in my curve, the first thing I'm going to do is change to my red channel. I use the targeting adjustment tool here. I don't just come in here and pick any random number on this curve line. Click on the hand that's got the arrow, the finger with the arrow pointing up and down on it, and come over, and you're going to click on the problem area. This is where I want to change. And look at where it is on my curve. It is almost at my white point up here. That is a problem for me, because if I click and pull, watch what happens. I'm going to click and pull down. You can do the same thing. Look at the correction that it makes in the middle. I've done very little correction on the very top, which is where it's needed. But I've got this huge correction in the middle area because of the way curves work. So instead of doing that, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Go ahead and click the white point, the topmost part of this curve. Click and drag it down, and you will see in doing that, you have a stronger correction that's happening now at the point, or very close to the point where the damage is, with much, much, much less correction in the midtones and absolutely none down in the shadows. Does that make sense to everyone? You'll see other things like this. It doesn't apply to this curve, but you'll see things like this too. If you see a curve flatline like this, you know you're in trouble. So I've just done one in the shadows, but again, look up at my screen to see what's going on. Because what's happened here is that it is zeroed out all of the tonality in the first literally half of my tonal range of this. It's all flatlined out. This is not how you would want your curve to actually be. Instead, you would undo that point, and instead you would grab the lower black point and drag it across. You'll get to the same place, but you don't destroy all of the tonal detail. You don't flatline all of this out to 0 that's here in the middle. So if you're close to any of your endpoints when you're doing this stuff, just go ahead and grab the endpoints. Don't try to do a curve again that sits right, that's so close to it that does something like this. I mean, look at this. There's very little change that I've done in my highlight point up in here, but the entire tonal range of my red has flatlined out on almost 3/4 of it, and look what it does to the image. I mean, if you want to really fuck it up and make it look, like, well, this is beginning to look like Stephen Klein. See, you guys thought I was going to say art, didn't you? So I'm not going after art today. I'm going after the fashion guys, of which I'm one. So this is my crowd, does this kind of shit. Anyway. All right, you guys understand where I'm going. All right, so I'm going to grab the top, and then I'm just going to look at the numbers. I'm looking at the numbers right here. My number 2, this 229, this 244, I want it to be 229. So I'm just going to grab that white point slider, start to drag down until I get to a 229. So now I've got a 229 for my point number 1 in the red channel, which matches the point number 2 red value. I'm going to then go to my green channel, again using the targeting adjustment tool. Now in this case, we're much more into the quarter tones, heading towards the midtones, so I'm not going to do that trick grabbing the white point. I'm just going to leave it where it is. I've got a 171 for my green that I'm on right now, but it needs to be a 190, so we need to push it up. And so I'm looking to get that one, again, that green point, this green point right here, to be a 190. If you get to like a 190 or it's a 191 or something like that, you can always go to your arrow keys to go up and down. Occasionally, you will not be able to hit that number exactly, but if you're within a point or two, you'll be fine. So now I've got a 190, so my greens are now matching. And then finally, I'm going to go to my blue. And in the blue, I've got a 165, but it needs to be a 172. Again, I'm going to use the targeting adjustment tool. It's kind of in my mid-range, so I'm fine with that. And I'm just going to push it up till I get to a 172 and use my arrow key to actually get it exact. So now the after points of my curve for this sunburn part equals the color and the tonality of the area that was originally down on her stomach. Does that make sense to everyone, what's going on here? Okay, fine. So, but it's happening to the entire image. I don't want it to happen to the whole image, so I'm going to invert this layer mask. You can throw away the blurred layer. You don't need that anymore. Hit the B key to get a brush. Make sure it's a completely soft brush. Normal blending mode, and then drop your opacity. 100% opacity, but drop your flow down to like a 3 or 4. We're just going to brush this in slowly. I'm going to double click on the hand to actually get it up. And then I'm going to start working on the very top area here and move around. You'll notice that she's got sunburn that's all around it's her upper chest as well. Now, my flow seems a little bit low to me. This seems like it's taking too long to get there, so I'm going to boost my flow up to more like an 8% and start going after the same thing. Wishing that I had my tablet. You'll notice she has sunburn underneath her bra. You need to make sure you get that part as well. It won't have any impact on the bra color itself. And as long as I'm there, I'm going to hit the sunburn that's actually on her shoulders and the outside of her arms. So this has lifted the color, but you'll also see if you zoom in really closely, we've got a problem here, and it's the areas that didn't have as bad a sunburn have now actually picked up a sort of a greenish cast to it. It's not the end of the world. Would I actually accept this? Yeah, depending on the nature of it, I might actually say this would actually work. What it definitely needs is a lift in tone, so we're going to do that part really quickly. Click on, we're going to add another curve on top of this. This is down and dirty, dodge and burning right now. A lot of times I would do our same tonal retouching layer. I would add a soft light layer. I would sample the color of her skin. I would make my dodging and burning colors. But if you just need to do a really quick lift to impress the client, or just to say, well, you see, this is what it'll look like, throw a curve on there, change its blending mode from normal down to screen, which lightens everything up. Invert the layer mask, and then again with your brush at that low flow, you can actually just start to paint this part in to actually lift it. And then for the most part, this is where we're at. We've actually got sunburn, no sunburn. Works out well. Second way of doing it, get rid of both of those layers. Second way, it starts out the same way we did before. We don't need these numbers on here, so if you click on your eyedropper tool and do the color sampler part, and then go up to the top of your options menu and hit clear all, it'll get rid of those guys so they won't bother you. Command J to make a duplicate of that layer. We're also going to blur that layer again. And say OK. And in this case, we're going to do, I think, a better way of doing color correction, especially extreme color correction like this, because you can be really targeted about it. You don't have to worry about that green problem. So to do that, come up to, we're going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer on top of it. So again, the little icon at the bottom that's half circle that's half black, half white, click on that, up to hue saturation. And the thing about hue saturation is we can do a real targeting. Now, not a lot of people explore this hue saturation dialog box a lot. I mean, we all know that you can grab the saturation slider and crank it back and turn her into black and white, that kind of stuff. That's not what this is about. This is going to be much more targeted. So to do that, I'm going to say use the targeting adjustment tool. Again, it's the hand that sits up at the top with the two arrows. Would somebody tell me why? In the curves dialog box, the hand is a finger pointing to the left with an arrow that points up and down. But in this dialog box, it's an arrow that a finger that points up with arrows going right and left. They couldn't have made it the same orientation. Drives me nuts. Anyway, select the targeting adjustment tool, and then again, you want to zoom in and you want to find the worst area of red that you can possibly find and click on it. And when you do that, you'll actually see something change. And what changes on your what I need to look at are the two lines that are at the very bottom of your properties panel right here. And what you see down here is the range of color that has been selected. So if you take a look at these two bars right down here, what they are showing you is the range of selection. So there are, if we look in the very center of it, there are two solid lines. What Photoshop is saying is that whatever color falls in between those two solid lines, any change that you make to saturation, to hue, or to lightness, whatever, it's going to be hit 100% that way. But then as you start to go from a solid bar to either the left or the right, and you get to that little triangle area, that it's going to ramp down in both directions. So the solid bar, you're at 100%, but by the time you get to that little triangle, it drops down to 0%. So what it's doing is it's saying, okay, we're going to select this color in the middle, and then we're going to ramp this down to 0 to the points that once you get outside of the color that you've selected, no matter what you do to the settings in the properties panel, nothing will actually happen to it. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, so it helps for us to be able to then fine-tune this. So the way to fine-tune this is to, I'm going to zip back out, take your saturation slider and drag it all the way to the right, and take your hue slider and drag it all the way to the right as well. And you can now see the area that's being impacted by this slider. You'll notice that the area that's the whitest part of her boobs, where there is no color, nothing has actually changed. However, all the rest of her skin basically is now included in this range. I need to fine-tune this range, and this just gives me a way to actually see it. So the first move you need to make is actually changing the color in totality. If you bring your cursor over and put it right between the two little bars, again, I'm talking about the two color range lines that are on the bottom, but right in between the bars, you can actually drag this in one direction or another. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this narrowed down so that the only thing that remains altered in color is the area that's right on top, is the sunburned area right there. I'm going to Command Z because changing that whole range didn't really help me at all. But now what you can do is you can click on one of the bars. I'm going to click on the one on the right hand side, and I'm going to try to narrow my range. I'm going to pull these two things closer together. So I'm clicking on the solid bar on the right hand side, and I'm going to start dragging it in sort of towards the other one. I'm going to then click on the other bar on the one on the left and start to pull it in. And now I've got to go after my ramps because I can tell this isn't really helping me a lot. So I'm going to go after the ramp on the right hand side. I'm going to click and I'm going to start to pull it towards the center. And then I'm going to go after the left side and do the same thing. And then I'm going to click on the middle and start to go in one direction or another. And you can see what's beginning to happen. In my case, as I start to pull towards the left now, I've actually, her skin tone on her arms and on her belly are beginning to return to normal. I've still got some stuff that's happening down on on both arms, that kind of stuff, whatever here. I've got the major part of it's happening is still, I've got a color impact that's happening on that. I'm going to continue to fine tune this. I'm going to open these up now a little bit to see if I can catch a little bit more of the top part of her chest. We'll see what's going on. I'm going to start with the ramps to begin with. And that pulls in a little too much on that one side. I'll see what happens if I kick out on the other side. That doesn't seem as bad. I'm going to pull the right ramp back in a little bit more. I'm going to slide the entire thing, continue to slide the entire thing towards her right side. Anyway, this seems almost like, pull the ramp out a little bit to get a little bit of the shadow in there. So for me, this is a good shot because I know she's got sunburn also on her arms and other areas right there. So I'm feeling good about this. I've got the majority of that. It's not really too bad on her stomach. I'm going to tighten it up just a little bit. So between the two bars, I'm going to drag them a little bit tighter. And slide this down just a little bit more. So that's what mine's going to look like. I would love to give you some numbers, but I can't. But that's what mine looks like. Her stomach's pretty clean. The shadow area down in here is okay. It's a little bit on her shoulders. It really hits the whole main sunburn part that's right there on her chest and not too much of the rest of this. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. Zero out your saturation and your hue. If you just double click on them, both those sliders, they zero out. The only reason we did that was to preview that area, to really get that area where we wanted it to be. And then simply come up to your, so has everybody got this back? Are we sort of all together on here? Grab your hue slider, because this is hue, is basically, it's hue and lightness both. Grab your hue slider that's up at the very top and just start to drag towards the right. And grab your lightness slider and start to push that also towards the right. We need to lift it a little bit. And we could also try dropping the saturation slightly. And then just turn this on and off and you can see what you've actually done. So again, I think it's a little bit darker. I would lift it a little bit more, but this to me is a better way of actually doing what we're looking for here. If you feel like that this isn't quite gotten enough of the area that you wanted to at this stage of the game, if you use your drop-down menu, it was in the reds, I think is where this all adjustment is. Yeah, it's in the reds. You can actually go back to those sliders and you can open them slightly up. I would do a little bit more ramp than I would anything else. And then you'll see I've got a lot of green that's coming through this now, so I would just pull the hue back a little bit closer to where it actually was. Yeah, and that seems like a better color to me. I would also lift it a little bit more. Boom. Questions? All right, you can close that up. You don't need to save that. If you ever take pictures of me, yeah. Okay. Moving on. Let's go back to session 13. Inside of session 13, there's a file called contentaware.tiff. If you could launch that. It's a beach scene with some kids, a couple of people in the water, an island, a bunch of that kind of other stuff here. So we are going to go through Content Aware pretty quick, and we'll save that, and then we'll do a version of this using AI and see which one we think is actually better. Okay, so first things first, make a duplicate of this layer, Command J. And then we're going to start with the two guys that are actually in the water, that's just from the sort of the shoulders up. So you can use automated tools to do selections for this. So I'm going to grab the quick selection tool, make it much smaller, and I'm just going to select the guy that's on the left-hand side. So once he is selected, there are various versions of Content Aware. So the oldest of them goes up, if you come up to the edit menu and you come down to fill, and in your drop-down menu for contents, you can actually pick Content Aware. You would leave color adaptation turned on and a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and simply say OK to that. And it does a reasonably good job of it, but the problem that you can see is that I've got a shadow outline of him. Two things happen. Number one is there's actually a shadow of him in the water that I didn't get. It wasn't part of the selection. But number two is also this edge of him. I'm going to hit Command D so you can see it. The edge of him still exists. And the reason this happens is that with Content Aware, you always want to select, not only do you need to completely select the thing that you want to be replaced, you also need to select some of the area that you want to use as the replacement. So in this case, I used the selection tool, but it was too tight. And so instead, I'm going to go back in history to where I just did my copy. I'm going to hit the L key to get the lasso tool. And this time, I'm going to just do an outline around him, making sure that I get a little bit of the water all the way around him, as well as shadow that's on the bottom. Don't do stuff that you don't need. So you can see on my selection, look at my screen really quickly here. There's a little too much of this right here. So while you've got the lasso still selected, simply hold down the Option key. You will get the negative selection tool for the lasso, and just trim that a little bit tighter, because there's no point in fixing something that isn't broken. So, and then again, we could come up to the edit menu down to fill and Content Aware. However, now Photoshop has gone one step further, because in those days, in the original Content Aware fill, you could not tell Photoshop what you wanted to use as source material to do the replacement. You simply had to trust Photoshop to do it. But now with Content Aware fill, menu item that's right, it's two things underneath the fill, is a Content Aware fill. If you click on that, you will see that all of a sudden these guys get surrounded with this green color. And the green color is telling Photoshop, you're saying to Photoshop, I want you to use everything that is covered in green as the source material to do the Content Aware for this person. You'll also notice that you're in a completely different workspace. So if you move this image that we're currently working on over to the left-hand side, you will actually see, you can even make the box smaller. I'm going to make mine a little bit smaller so I can see both of these. You will actually see the result in the screen that's underneath it. You will also see on the left-hand side, there is 4 tools on the left-hand side up at the top. There's a brush tool, there's a lasso tool, a hand tool, and a magnifying glass. The magnifying glass and the hand are just like in Photoshop. All they do is move you around and zoom in and zoom out. The lasso tool is what we actually use to actually start this whole thing, and you can actually still use that tool to add or subtract from your selection. But the brush tool is what we really want to use, because what the brush tool does is that it allows you to modify the areas that you want to use to do the fill for this person. Right now, the fill that Photoshop has suggested is horrible, because it is not only got the area around him, it's actually including the second guy. Well, I don't want the second guy to be part of the calculation to replace this. I want to get rid of that guy too. But worse, it's actually using all of the water as it's heading up towards the island that is much deeper in space, much more out of focus, much more, the depth of field is controlling that. The waves are much smaller. All of that is being figured into the calculation, as is all the area that's much closer to the beach. Again, the waves are much larger, the highlights are much larger. You don't want to use any of that shit. You want to use the area that's surrounding this guy. So with the brush tool, you can actually make your brush larger using the bracket tools. By default, the brush is a subtraction brush. So you can paint over the background, and I'm painting to get rid of all of it, the information that it would be using to select in the back. I'm going to use the hand to actually move it up, and I'm actually going to get rid of all the stuff that's in the front. I'm going to get rid of the guy that's in right next to him. But now, if you zoom your tool out, zoom your whole image out, you can actually add areas if you want to. To add an area, to get a positive brush, all you need to do is hold down the Option key or go up to the very top of your Options palette, and you can click on the little plus icon up there if you don't want to hold down the Option key the whole time. And I'm simply going to extend the range of what I think is the kind of good water that I want it to be figured into my selection. And then I'm going to look at the results. And I don't know if you remember or saw what it looked like in the beginning, but you could still almost tell the outline of where the guy was. But this is actually now a really good version of this. However, those are not your only options. So in taking a look at the content aware controls on the right-hand side, where it says show the sampling area, we actually have it. You do want to see that. That would just turn off the green or turn it back on. It's still there, but you want to be able to see it. You can control the opacity of the green. 50% makes sense so that you can actually see what's behind, what's underneath it. You can change the color of the overlay in case the image you're working on is this green. You wouldn't want this green to be on green. You would change it to another color. Just click on it. It opens up your color picker. You can change a different color. And then finally down in the sampling area options, we are not doing any of these sampling area options, but under the fill settings, these things matter. You have two of them that really, well, one of them that really matters. The one that says color adaptation actually does matter. If you click on it, you will see that you get a none, a default, a high, or a very high. If we go to none, watch where the guy is. Again, he's in this preview. We're seeing the result screen right here. Click on none, you'll actually see it. It'll recalculate and change. Now, I didn't see much of a change there. I'm okay. I'm going to go back to the default, and you can see it does change it a little bit. I get a little bit more of his shape. We can actually bump it up to high now and see, is that better or worse? That actually looks a little bit better to me. It fills that space in a little bit more, and then we can go to very high. And very high, you start to pick up too many of those anomalies in there. So for my money, high is where I would go with this. Rotation is exactly what it says. It's going to actually take this and rotate it. So you'll see what happens if you go from none up to high. You'll see what it does to this. It actually rotates this, and no longer do I have the sort of the white striations of water going left to right. They're now in the patch for him. They're now almost going from the top left to the lower right, because you're actually rotating the fix. Very rarely do I use any rotation adaptation here at all. I'm going to go back to the none part of all of that. And then finally, if you're happy with what you've got, simply hit apply. Or I'm taking it back. Apply will apply it and then hit OK. And you'll actually see the guy has changed, and there we go. Command D to deselect. I'm going to go after the next guy, and I'm going to do the same exact thing. Just circle around him up to the file menu, edit menu, down to content aware fill. Again, I'm going to use my much larger brush to get rid of all of that water that's in the back, all the water that's in the front. And for time's sake, I'm just going to leave it where it is right now. I'm going to go back to my color adaptations and look at none, and look at default. Look at high. High is better for me, and very high. Very high is actually better still, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Command D to deselect. Now, if you're looking at this and say, well, Verser, I can still see exactly where those two guys were, you wouldn't really be able to see that. But if you feel that way about it, if you feel like, okay, I can see where there's all these white areas on the water and it all disappears here, there's nothing that's stopping you from continuing to actually use your normal retouching tools. Hit the S key to get the clone stamp tool. Make your clone stamp a little bit larger. We're going to make it 50% hardness. That's really the default for a clone stamp tool. And I'm going to sample over here in an area where I've got all of that sort of like white dance on the water. Hold down my option key, click to sample a point, and then I'm simply going to run it through the area where the guys were. So then it just breaks that up so it doesn't look like it's all been pasted in there. So then I'm going to go after the buoy that's in the background, the L key to get the lasso tool. I'm going to select the buoy. Again, up to the menu, content aware fill. I'm going to get rid of the entire island that doesn't have any business being part of this. So make my brush much larger. Get rid of the island and some of the water that's close down, and say OK. I know it does a great job. We need to go after the people on the raft. Command D, lasso tool. Content aware fill. Again, big brush. Get rid of all of the island. And the boat. And the area that's in the front. And say OK. Command D to deselect. There's a boat on the horizon. When you do this, you need to make sure that you get horizon as well as water. And then again, content aware fill. I'm going to leave sky and water, just not as much of it, so it stays closer to giving me the kind of size of waves in the water. I don't really need to worry too much about the sky because the sky has no distance to it. I don't want any part of the island in there though. And I'm going to just say OK. I'm not even looking at my preview. Command D to deselect. And then finally, well, not finally, we're going to go after the island. Now for the island, I am going to use a quick selection tool. So go to the quick selection tool. Again, make sure that tool does not ever touch the edge you want it to find. So I want it to find the edge along the water and the edge along the sky. So do not let it touch any of that. But the problem that we've got now, again, is going to be the same thing as that original selection. But I can actually expand my selection now that it's been made. So up to the select menu, down to modify, and we are going to expand the selection. I think I'm going to grab 10 pixels and we'll see what that looks like. And 10 pixels seems about right. So you can see I've got a really solid, good selection of this. It sort of follows the edge of the island, and that part actually works for me. So up to the edit menu, down to content aware fill. In this case, I don't need any of the kids that are down along. Sorry. Shit. Cancel out of that. And hit the R key. I'll show you as soon as I undo my rotate. All right, do you have the selection of the island? Okay, that's what I've got going on right here. So up to the select menu, down to modify, down to expand, and then 10 pixels worked for me. And then again, up to edit menu, down to content aware fill. I'm gonna kick this to the side. Again, what I don't want is, I don't want the kids on the beach to be considered for getting rid of the island. I'm leaving all of the sky though. And I'm gonna take a look at my preview. Again, the island matters. Now you can see that it's actually bringing water up into the sky. You can try the different adaptations to see if anybody is a little bit better in this. For the most part, it's not looking like it's just going to change it, and then it starts to like fuck it up. So I'm going to go back to the default. It was actually the best of them, but don't worry about that part, even though there's still an issue with this. Go ahead and say OK. And then Command D to deselect your lasso tool and select now the area where it pulled all the water up into the sky. And I'm going to come all the way down. And again, up to the edit menu, down to content aware fill. Bless you. And then in this case, I'm going to get rid of, again, all of the sea that's really close to the beach. And this is, if you take a look at your preview or showing it, it looks great. I'm going to say OK to that. Command D to deselect. So content aware, you can do it multiple times over the same thing. But things are working out pretty well for me. Every time I say this, I'm worried that somebody's going to take my next line out of context and somehow, but now it's time to kill the kids. So, I know it's so wrong, right? Okay. Yeah, the lasso tool. No, can't you see that happening, right? Like, finally I decided to go into politics, and then there's going to be this recording of me. He was part of a cult, a pedophile cult that killed children. Listen to this. Okay, now it's time to kill the kids. Done. My whole my future is, God, what a horrible job. I cannot think of there was a time in my life that I thought maybe politics, I can't think of that's like hell to me now. That would be like, what could be the worst life you could possibly have? It would be that. From all sides. Right? I would not be able to sleep with myself. I wouldn't be able to sleep with anyone else. It's just so. The Italians have a great word for this, schifo. And I've always loved that word because it sounds like it's, like disgusting sounds pretty good too, right? Disgusting is another good word because disgusting, it sounds, anyway. Okay, I'm going to get off my rant. So I'm going to go after the two kids. See, this is even worse. I'm going after the two kids on the right. I know, right? In all likelihood, you're probably better off selecting both of them as opposed to trying to select one each, but you also need to make sure you realize that there is a reflection of the little girl, and you need to include her in your content-aware fill. So again, it's a big selection on that whole part, but it's also make sure you get the reflection of them both, and then again, up to edit, down to content-aware fill. I'm going to slide this to the side. This would be a definite time to look at your color adaptations. So I'm going to see what none looks like. Yeah. Default is definitely better than none. High starts to pull the reflection back in. And really high starts to pull in. It's like double the reflection of her like arms and stuff, whatever. So default is definitely, I think, the strongest of them all. Yep, I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Command D to deselect, and then let's go after the two little girls on the left. There's just no winning in this. So the two little girls on the left-hand side, again, they both have reflections. I've tried to, I just missed the shadow of one of them. So there's a shadow that extends out. Hold down your shift key to be able to add to the selection and just grab that part. I've tried to actually drop down in the middle area to not lose all of the water that's in the middle. It doesn't really work that well. You might try to keep that in with the overlay. So we'll see what that looks like. So up to the content aware fill. In the overlay part, we could, so again, all of the beach and the sky go. They don't belong in any of this. There's nothing in the sky that's going to help you figure out what should be happening on the beach. So it should be only beach. Not only beach, it needs to be water that surrounds the little girls as well. So I'm feeling pretty good about that part. You could conceivably try to paint the area down in between them two to include that in the calculation. I don't think that's really going to help. So can I get my power back? Thank you. I'm going to push this to the side, and I'm going to run through the color adaptations just to see if I feel like something is better. Looks like very high just muddles things up. High puts a lot of sand out in the water that doesn't belong out there. I think default is still going to be the best, so that's the one I'm going to go with. Say okay to that. Then we need to do a little cleanup in here. Command D to deselect. If we come down and look, you want to look for repeating patterns. So right now, I don't see, yeah, I got one right here. So if you take a look up at my screen, you can see there's a shape that's right here that is a repeat of the shape that's right here, and there's also where the water's actually lapping up onto the beach. Both of those are repeating patterns, and you need to just break them apart. You don't need to like go in and change everything about it, but you just need to change enough of it. So I'm going to go back to the clone stamp tool. I'm going to sample an area right here on the beach and just knock off a little bit of the top edge of that. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to sample a little bit of water and just knock out part of that edge right there, just so that it's not the same thing as on the other side. And those are really the only two repeats. I don't really like where the little girls got wiped out. So again, I'm going to zip back out, grab some clone stamp tool on this side and kind of run through areas in here, just to break this part up a little bit. Yeah, and I'm going to go with that. Double click on the hand, call it a day. So basically created a beach scene without these people. I'm going to, actually I'm going to leave this guy just like it is, and I'm going to rename this content aware. And then we're going to do this using AI. So I'm going to turn off the content aware file. I'm going to go back to my original one that has everybody on it. I'm going to hold down the, I'm just going to hit Command J to actually do this all in one shot. I'm going to do this in the same sort of process. Now, in order to use to use AI on this, generative fill on this, you need to be in the latest version of Photoshop 2024. There was a beta before that had it in it as well. That one will also work. If you're not upgraded to the latest greatest, you do not have this. So, but anyway, other than that, there's also another beta out now that has this. It doesn't really change a whole lot in here. One of the things to remember, though, about artificial intelligence is that there is a size limit. They've done this for commercial purposes, I'm certain. So you cannot work on an area that's larger than 1024 pixels by 1024. It's either 1024 or 1048, but basically 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels is the largest your file or the area that you're working on can actually be for this to work. So I'm certain that that will change eventually, but in this case, it's not going to be a problem for this image. So we're going to do both of the guys in the beginning. Again, it starts with the lasso tool, so the L key. You can be reasonably generous about your selection in that, but just make sure that you get both of the guys as well as some of the water, as well as their shadows, their reflections, all of that kind of stuff in here. To get to it, if you don't have they call it the taskbar now, and the taskbar is not AI only. It has to do with anything that Photoshop anticipates that you're trying to do. So for instance, if you've got a selection, it will give you options to modify your selection, all that kind of stuff. So at any rate, if you don't see your taskbar, you need to go to your window menu, click on the window menu, and it's all the way down, almost at the very bottom. It's called contextual taskbar. If you click on that, it will actually open it up. You can move this taskbar around. So you can click on the left-hand side where the little bar is. You can move it around. You can actually anchor the bar. If you go to your little three tabs, the little three tabs down here, this is where you can actually reset its position. So the bar will try to stay out of your way. You can pin the bar. A lot of people that I know will actually bring this up and make it an extension of their options bar at the very top. So you could put it up here at the top, click on this and say you want to pin the bar in this position. It'll always be there. To move it, you need to unpin the bar and then you can move it around. But you can see right now that I've got options to work with on this. I can invert my selection, whatever, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to pull this back down, kind of where it was. But in our move right here, to remove something, you can actually click on the word that says generative fill. It will then open up and say, well, what do you want to fill this thing with? And this is where you would type in prompts. So when you're talking about prompts in AI, what it is looking for is nouns, not verbs. So you don't go in here and say, remove the two people. You would simply say, ocean. But in this case, if you do nothing, Photoshop understands that you are trying to simply remove this and blend it into the surrounding area. So in this case, to remove these people, we don't need to do anything. You simply click on generate. And it will run through. If you're doing this, you have to be online because this is actually sending your image right now up to Photoshop's servers. They actually do the artificial intelligence replacement on the server and then download it back down. That may be another reason that there is restrictions on the resolution size, because you're moving a lot of data up there and then back down again. Does a pretty good job of it. I'm actually going to select the entire island. I'm just going to do it manually, and I'm also going to get the people on the raft and the buoy as well, and just see what happens. Again, click on generative fill and then generate. I'm going to go after the little boat. And the two kids on the right, including the reflections. Oh, and you should know, I'm sorry about this, whatever. There's other things that happen in this. As soon as that does that, if you take a look over at your properties panel, you will actually see, you can get their variations of what it did. It gives you 3 options every time you do it. And so you can click on the first option is the one that's selected. You can click on the second one and say, do you like that one better? Or you can click on the third one, do you like that one better? I'm actually going to go back to the first one, second one, third one. I'm actually going to stay with the third one. It's a little more active. And then finally, I'm going to go to the two little girls on the left-hand side. And on this one, instead, I'm going to click on Generative Fill. And then I'm going to type in lion on the beach. And hit generate. Wow, the best of AI. Pretty funny, right? Yeah, not really what I was looking for here. Let's try this. I'm going to go back one step in history. Let's try generative fill. Let's try realistic lion on the beach. And generate. Clearly, Photoshop has got a different idea of what a realistic lion looks like than I do. But at any rate, I'm going to go back and instead just hit on generative fill and generate. I'm just going to remove them. I will say this, I've explored the AI enough to realize that if it didn't have the size limitation, in all likelihood, I would be using it a whole lot more. Wow, and now it gave me a girl, and I have no idea why that is. So let's just try and... Oh, you know what's happening? It's doing all of this stuff above where I've done all of this. But at any rate, let's see where I'm going to go back in history. I've got the kids. I did the last of the generative fill. And there is another tool that's also AI fueled, and we'll see how well that works with just the little girls. So if you come over to your flyout menu, it's the healing brush tool. If you click on the healing brush tool, you'll come down. There is now a remove tool that sits between spot healing and the regular healing brush. Click on that. Oh, sorry. I think once you click on that, you actually have to paint with it. So I've got the remove tool, and oh, I can't paint on it because there's a generative layer that's already on here. So I'm going to go back down to my background copy, and that may have been why this existed. Anyway, I'm going to paint, and you'll see it puts like a color on an overlay on your image. If you circle, it used to be you had to paint the kids entirely, but if you just encircle them now completely with that brush and let go, it will select the entire thing. And then it will also do the remove. It didn't get the shadow. So that would be another option for this. I'm going to then do a merge stamp version of all of these, not my content aware layer at the very top. And then look at the difference between the two. Actually, I like the content-aware version of clouds in the back, especially. I like better. I might like part of the beach better with the AI version, though. Questions about any of this? Okay, we got that. You can close this up. We've got 2 things left to get to, and then we're pretty caught up. How many of you guys do panoramas? Or would even consider doing panoramas? Okay, we're not only going to look at panoramas, but I want you to think about panoramas in a more broad sense. Because everybody thinks of panoramas as like, you know, a big skyline, that kind of stuff, or, you know, or the lake, or that kind of stuff. But you can think of panoramas completely differently. You could think of panoramas, for instance, let's say I've actually got one of the most beautiful panoramas that I ever did was it was like this huge sort of like depression in the ground that had just been filled up with leaves and dead branches, and the whole thing had like baked and gone silver. So it was this giant, I mean, it was the size of half of this room, this like giant area of this incredible silver leaves and sticks, and I wanted to create this giant panorama of it, and that's exactly, so I shot it as a panorama and stitched it together in Photoshop, and it looked amazing. So it works out really well. So at any rate, to give you some idea of what it is we're really thinking about doing, if you take a look in the same folder that we're in right now, so again, session 13, there is a folder called Panorama Files, and if you take a look at them, I'm just going to show these to you really quick. These are by a guy named Seth Resnick. He's a stock photographer, really famous stock photographer, whatever. I picked these up in a workshop that he did, so these are his files, just so that everybody knows. And basically, he lives in Florida. He lives in South Beach. He went up to the very top of his building, handheld. He didn't put this on a tripod. He didn't get one of those pan heads that actually keeps your camera perfectly level, all that kind of stuff. And he had his camera on automatic. So his exposure actually changes. And what he did was he faced it, his camera looking southeast, and he went bang, 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 7 shots or 8 shots over to the southwest. And that's the pictures that we're going to stitch together. And that's what you're sort of looking at right here. So this is one of the frames, and this is the next frame, and the next frame, and the next. So you get what's going on here, right? Okay. So to do the stitching, you actually want to go Start in Photoshop, come up to the File menu, down to Automate, down to Photo Merge. And a dialog box will open up. You pick the way that you want to do the photo merge. Now, in most cases, you're going to want to use auto for this. However, imagine, let's say we do the pictures in this room, not something that was done outside, but in this room. And so I'm the camera, and I point right at this wall. Now that wall from here to that wall over there is 15 feet, right? So I'll go bang, picture, bang, bang, bang. But by the time I get to that wall back there, it's twice as far away from me. So when I go to do the stitching together, I run into a problem that is going to be much smaller than this area. And by the time I get over here, it's going to get bigger again. What that creates is a panorama that ends up being, it ends up being concave. So the edges are bigger, and as you start to move to the middle, it starts to get smaller. You can use different versions of this to do a correction for that. So I typically start with auto. It does a very good job of it. But the reason you have these others, this would be that case right here, is that this will actually do a correction, and it will then take that center area and make it larger, as well as the side areas, and make it smaller so that it looks like a true panorama. Anyway, auto will be fine. Click on the Browse button. You need to go find those files. So again, they're going to be in our session number 13. In the panorama folder. Click on the first one, hold down your shift key and click on the last one. You can click all 7, you can select all 7 or 8 of them and say open. And then down in terms of how you blend these together, you have an option here to do a vignette removal. Do not ever turn that on. That's really about for wide angle lenses. It'll actually screw up what you're doing in your image, as does geometric distortion correction. If you put that in, what that'll do is actually introduce geometric distortion. You don't want to put that in. And then finally, there's a content aware fill transparent area. You can go ahead and click that. I'll show you what that ultimately does, and then hit OK. And then Photoshop is just going to do its thing. So Paige will get here next week sometime with, no, just kidding. This is so processor intensive. You'll see you get this panorama that's put together at the very top. You'll also notice that you get marching ants on this. That's because you clicked on that fill transparent areas with content aware fill. This is just on the very top layer. It's a merge stamp version of everything that then had content aware run on areas. And in the area, if you hit Command D to deselect, you'll see in the areas that are in the very top of the sky, whatever, it actually works out very well. It gets really screwed up if you look down in the lower lower right-hand corner. You'll actually see. Hold on 1 second. Let me get rid of my taskbar. You'll see areas that get screwed up down at the bottom. But if you take a look, just turn it off, you'll see this is the area. The reason that you've got these edges is like this is because he handheld it. So as he was going around like this, he was actually slightly panning his camera from the lower left up to the upper right, and that's where you get these transparent areas. So it wasn't like a perfectly shot panorama level panorama, right? The content aware thing does a really good job though of one side, but what's amazing to look at is if you hold down the option key and click on any one of the eyeballs, for instance, this was one of the river, look at the mask that's actually been put on this. And again, the content aware is actually matched the exposure, because the exposure, if you look at the stuff that's making up the sunsets, they are completely different in tone. If you actually take the masks off and look at them, it's like almost a stop correction because it was so overexposed when he was, or so underexposed when he was actually looking at the sun. So it's just incredible. But Photoshop also realizes that with the water, there's actually motion in the water between frames. So it selects as much of the water as it possibly can in a single frame to eliminate the motion part in it. It's very smart software. Now, if you're really into doing this work, there's dedicated programs that do nothing but this that are better than Photoshop, but this will do it 9 times out of 10 easily. Olivia? Got it. So if it won't let you do that part because yours is set to open to smart objects, then you got to do this. Come up to your Photoshop menu, down to Preferences, down to Camera Raw. Open up Camera Raw Preferences, and then in Workflow, uncheck Open in Photoshop as Smart Object. And then run it again, and you'll be good. Okay, the last thing I'll say about this really quickly, if we come up to the very top, even though the content aware part does a great job, if you look it up at the sky, so again, you can turn the eyeball on and off, and you can see this is the area that it actually filled. No, sorry. This is the area that it filled up in the top left-hand corner. It does a really good job of this part. Lower right-hand corner, not so much. So in the lower right-hand corner, if we want to fix this really quickly, it's done a pretty good job, but it's a relatively easy fix on the bottom part. I'm going to zip back out just a little bit. So this is just a clone stamp. So make a copy of the layer that's currently there, Command J. I'm going to hit the S key to get the clone stamp tool. You want this to be a relatively hard clone stamp tool. So again, not 100%, but I'm going to crank it up because you want a pretty sharp edge on this. This is a lot like the work we do when we use the clone stamp in doing frequency separation. So I'm going to put mine at about an 80%. I'm going to make my brush larger. And then what I'm going to do is if you take a look at the edge of the edge of where the houses are actually meeting the canal, there's a row. It looks like almost looks like a picket fence, but it's actually palm trees. I'm going to start at the very edge where that yard actually meets the sort of like foresty part. That's where I'm going to start on this one. So I'm going to sample this. I'm going to hold down my Option key, click to set the source point there. And then I'm going to bring it down, and I'm going to try to line up where I figure I can get the dock to actually line up with a dock that's already existing. And I'm going to click and then just drag forward on it. And I'm going to replace the yard with the other one. So now it's done a relatively good job. I would have to go in and clean this up, but you can also see there's a huge shift in the water, the color of the water. That's the stuff that I replaced. The best tool to actually blend that together is going to be the the healing brush tool, because remember, that's what healing brush tool does. So I'm going to use this spot healing brush to see what it thinks should actually happen. I'm going to make it a little bit larger, and then I'm simply going to paint across that union. And don't like the way that worked. Command Z to undo that. At this stage of the game, I think I would go in and do this tonally. Or the color trick that I just showed you guys earlier about matching color, using color by the numbers. Because this doesn't look like it's going to want to blend, and I'm not going to spend hours doing this. Questions about any of this? Okay, I will show you focus stacking next week, unless there's anybody in this room that's using or needing focus stacking on their projects right now. I don't think any of you are. Okay, guys, that's it. Questions about any of this? We good? I'll see you next week.